Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to take a look at a demo of state machine workflow within PowerAutomate. So as you already familiar that most of the time we create sequential flows into PowerAutomate where the flows start at one end and gets completed or terminated at another end. So there is no looping between the states or stages of that flow. The other type of flow, which is state machine workflow, which actually consists of the states, and we can actually go back and forth with those states. So I have just created one of the example of state machine workflow where you can see I have starting point where the item is created and then end point once the item is approved by finance team. So it's a multi-step approval flow. One level of approval is required for the manager, another level is for finance team. So right now, if you look at these are the four states which are involved in this flow. So expense submitted for manager, finance team, and then end. So basically, logically, three states only. And what if if manager wants to send it back to the requester? So the state transition should happen. And what if the finance team wants to send that back to manager? So for example, if some comment is most importantly required from manager before approving it, and what if if finance teams reject that back to requester? So that transition should happen from for finance team state to requester state again. So this is just one single instance, but the transition is happening between these states. So this is the demo which we are going to look at, because it could be a valid scenario where you wish to have just one instance of the flow running, and based on the outcome of the task which is there for manager or for finance team, it should move ahead or go back into the previous state. So let's start building that flow. So I am into my make.powerautomate.com and I'll just start creating one instant cloud flow. And right now I just skip my trigger, and trigger I wish to have that tied up with one of my SharePoint list, that is expense tracker, where I would be having the expense item, date, amount, category, and approval status. So this column is important because we are having approval status based on the states in this column: new, pending with manager, pending with expense team, and that rejected. And we'll be writing to this column based on our flow. So I'll just start creating the trigger when item is created in SharePoint or modified, and I'll bind that to our SharePoint site and as well as the expense tracker list. And in next step, I'll be initializing one variable and I'll name that as var state. So this will contain the state name, so it will be of type string. And as I said, we'll be working in state. So there is no direct way of creating any states into cloud flows. So what we have is I'll use the switch cases to decide a logical states rather than having the actual state. So I'll just use one switch action, and that action would have multiple cases. And this switch would work on this previous variable which I just defined. So I'll just use that var state. So when var state is let me just open that PPT. So var state is once the item expense is submitted. So that's a starting point of my flow. So I'll just have that as flow started. And so that it can come into this state, I have to give the same text or the string while initializing the flow var state variable so that it can go to this first state. So I'll just rename that as state expense submitted, and I'll add a couple of other cases which will act as a state. So I'll just actually minimize my browser zoom so that you can see all the states in one shot, and I'll just say this case and rename this as state pending with manager. And over here I'll check where state is pending with manager, then this state should appear up this. And I'll add one other case, that is state pending with expense team or finance team, state pending with finance team. And over here, I'll just use the pending with expense team as variable value. And if I zoom a bit more, then you would able to see like I have this all these three cases. Now I'll be writing or adding the action into these states and making a transition back based on the outcome of my individual state task. So I'll again zoom a bit better so that we can see at the individual states. So right now in the first state itself, what I'll do, I'll set the variable var state so that it can go to my this pending with manager state. So I'll just say var state pending with manager. So it will allow this state to go into this state. But how will that happen? So for that, we have to actually include one do until loop so that it can keep on checking. It can keep on calling that looping stuff, and it keep on going into these states. And once the outcome is completed, so I'll just minimize my switch, and on top of my switch, I'll just add do until loop so that my flow instance can be looping or like keep checking into that simple loop. And this do until will be targeted to var state and var state equal to completed. So this state, this variable, we are going to mark that as completed once all the approvals are done so that it can exit from do until. I'll just pick my switch and drop it over here and under this do until. And in the limits, so just remember like keep that limit as 5,000 as maximum, and timeout time, so you can define that for days. So for days you can say like 30D in this fashion, or if it, for the testing you just want to keep that for R, then you can just keep simply having this PT24 hatch. That means like 24 hours timeout for this individual loop. So you can define your timeout, so nothing to worry about that. And now I'll just go to my switch statement back so that I can define my states actions. So in this expense submitted, I just set up my variable. So now it will go to this state. But we are going to, right now we are just transitioning to pending with manager, but we are going to do a bit more over here, but I'll just park this for a while so that we can do a logic into pending with manager state. So over here, I'll just add one scope. So you maybe already know that scope actually bundles up all my tasks or actions within this scope itself. So in this scope, I'll just add one task, that is start and wait for approval. And over here, so that one task would be created for my manager once this state is being called. And into this action approval type, I will be using custom response wait for one response. So in the custom response, I'll be defining my own response. So own response means like what option a manager as an approver, what he or she can click. So it's first is approved, and approved will send that to expense or finance team. So this is first option. Second option, I wish to send it back to my requester so that requester can take corrective action. So I'll just say rejected and send back to requester. So these are just to my two response options. And in the title, I'll just say that new expense waiting for your approval. You can very well add the title of that expense and assign to. So in actual workflow, if you wish to send it to manager, you can pick the O365 user connector where you can actually pick up the manager which is defined in the AD for that particular requester. But for now, I'll just add that as a static one, my name, so that we should not be worried about like to fetching the actual manager. So for fetching the manager, you can very well watch my other videos where I have explained how you can get the manager of the currently logged in user or with an email ID. In the details, I can write down my detail on detail. Please approve expense item. Over here you can define the details. In item link, I can add that from dynamic value as link to item, and description you can simply say link to expense item. And in show advanced, you can decide, you can do other multiple options. For example, enable notification. Yes, I would like to have that. Enable reassignment. No, I don't wish to have this reassignment of my task. And this attachment, you can just leave that as blank. So we have created our start and wait for approval task. Now I need to capture the outcome of my start and approval task so that I can decide like whether I need to transition to my this state pending with finance team or go back to the flow initiated or the state where expense was submitted. So I'll just put up one condition, and in this condition I'll have, again I'll choose my outcome of my task. Previous task is equal to, I'll just capture the responses so that I should not do any typo. I'll just copy it and paste it. If outcome is approved and send it to finance team, then I'll just simply set my variable status, set variable val status to my next state, and next state is my this pending with finance team. So I'll just copy the text and I'll set that over here. So I just updated my variable to move to the next state based on the approved action. And the same thing I'm going to do for a if my action, if the approver, the manager rejected that task and asked to send back. So I'll just set the variable to transition to my previous state. So for that, I'll just again set my variable status and use this flow started name of that state or condition so that we can transition to that state. And over here, I'll be setting my item update so that I can capture the state of my the approval status. I'll just say update item of my this site with list name expense tracker, and ID is of ID item created. And title again from the dynamic title of an item was created. So I can set that as pending with expense team if it's approved. And the same update item stuff I would do and set the status again back to requester. So I need to add one more state over here because right now we don't have that send back to requester or rejected state. So I'll just add send back to requester so that we can set up this state. I'll just save, and I'll just reconnect to my site, choose my expense tracker list and set that ID to the, I actually use the approval status which we just set send back to requester. And if you wish to like have the log history, then you can very well use that log history to actually capture or write a line, logging line. So for example, if I'm having that column as description, so you can add that approved by manager, and on date you can add date from expression, and from dynamic you wish to append it if it's not a append type column. Otherwise you can just keep it like this, approved by manager, and then description if it's having any previous value. So that's how you can keep on logging column as well. It's fine. So for now, like I'm just going back to my this next state. So we are just done with the pending with manager. So we are right now looking at the positive outcome that approved by manager and approved to and sent to finance team. So I just minimize it and start working into my this next state, that is approved pending with finance team. So I'll just add one scope again, the same set of operations we are going to do. I'll just add one more task, and that task is for and start and wait for an approval. And over here I'm going to again choose that custom response, and I'll define my custom response as approved. So it will just complete my flow. And the other response could be send back to manager, and the other response could be send back to requester. So based on this outcome of my this task, I'll be deciding which state to be transitioned. So I'll just go and add the other title of task. New expense is waiting your approval. Assigned to, right now I am not going to fetch that from any group. So for extracting the users from any group, you can watch my other videos where I've done this. I'm just hard coding it to myself so that I can show you the emails as well. And in detail, I can write in details of that item, and in item to link, I can give it a link to item so that it directly item, by clicking that link, item can be reviewed. Expense item. So this is how we have created this task. Again, I'll use one condition, and that condition. So right now the outcome can be of three types. So condition would not be, if and else would not suffice us. So I'll again use one switch so that I can have multiple outcomes. And the first outcome would be if it's approved. So I'll just copy the outcomes from my previous tab. If it's approved, then what I should do, I can just actually set my variable as completed so that I can come out of this do until. Remember, we set that do until to be completed once the status is called, that state variable is called as completed. So I'll just set that completed because my flow is completed over here. So that is done. So what in second case? In second case, if the outcome is sent back to manager, so I'll just copy that so that we should not do any typo errors. So if send back to manager, if the status, the outcome, so I forgot to actually add that switch condition to the outcome. If outcome is sent back to manager, then I would be setting that state variable as sent back to manager or pending with manager. So I'll just say where state, and again copy my case text so that we can transition to this state once person is clicking on pending or sent back to manager. And we can very well update the item again with the status. I'll just add the update item action, and we'll update that item with the proper status. And in the approval status, it's approved, so I'm just setting that as approved. And the same update we are going to do over here so that we can send the status back to pending with manager. And because we are transitioning back to our manager state. So this is case number 2. And the case number 3, like if we want to transition or send that back to requester, the if first state. So I'll just copy the outcome, third outcome, which is sent back to requester, and set that into my case number 3. And in this again, I'll set this status of where state to transition back to the first state. So where state equal to flow started. So that is our first state. And update item and send back to requester. I will just update that status so that we can be sure that it's actually looping back. It's not a fresh request. Send back to requester. So we have done this. We have catered these 3 conditions with our expense pending with the item is pending with finance team as well. So now we have catered pending with manager, with task pending with finance team with a task, but there is a catch now. So in this initial state, so once the item is sent back to the requester, so how the requester would able to take the action on that item, and my flow should be waiting for that action. So for that, I'll be actually using one condition first of all. So that condition would be to check my current status of my item. So that condition would check my approval status. So if approval status is new, which is my initial condition, if you look at it in the approval status, I have the status as new, pending, and the other one. So if it's new, that means it's the first time my this first flow is initiated. So I'll just use the approval status value is not equal to new. That means like it's resubmitting. This state was called from the other state once the other manager or expense team is resubmitting the flow. So I'll have to do some operation over here so that the requester would be notified, and my requester should be completing some action so that the resubmit or the restart of that operation or the flow can happen again. So if it's not new, then we'll do something. If it's new, then simply this action which we wrote would actually come over here. So we are simply transition. If it's new, we are transitioning to the next state. If it's not new, then we have to do some other task. So that is, I'll do a send email with options task so that my requester can decide whether he or she is done with corrective action or not. So I'll just say this as my dynamic created by email, and your input subject, I'll say like manager or expense team rejected, please take the corrective action. And in this user choice, I'll be updating user choice as corrected and resubmit or withdraw. So these are two choices to the requester. He can correct the request, the expense item, and resubmit. These would be appearing as a button in the email, or withdraw the request. So if that is there, then I have to actually check the outcome of my this task. And this is not a approval task, so it will not, the R flow will not wait for this task to receive the outcome. For that, we have to again use one small do until. So do until loop so that something is being captured by this previous step. Some outcome is there. Do until, yeah. So in this, I'll be actually using one variable. So I'll just go to my top and again initialize variable, that is variable, and I'll just say that as var request resubmitted done. So let's keep that, and it's of type string, let's say, and I'll just go to my again that switch for my first state where I have this expense submitted in this condition over here. So I'll check for my this variable which we just created, request resubmitted done. That means like we want to go ahead with our flow. So over here, like once the request is submitted, I mean the person is has taken this action, either clicked on resubmit or withdraw. So we have to set our variable over here so that we should know that now we have to break the do until loop. So I'll just add one action to check for condition, and in this condition I'll just say the outcome or the response of my previous tab selected option for email selected option either is equal to, directly you can say like either blank, or you can simply for a better surety, you can say like either equal to corrective action, and you can add row with or. We can have the same dynamic selected option, and selected option is equal to the other option, withdraw. I'll just copy the name so that we should not do any mistake. So if it's either this one or that one, that means like we have to set our variable request resubmitted done as completed so that we should get out of this do until loop. So I'll just set that variable request done as completed, and it will just get us out of this do until loop, because I'll just say that completed. If var request done is marked as completed, then this loop would break and we will just get to the next state. So in the next state, how we are going to decide which state we are going to go? So we have to decide on this variable, the selected output option. So either what you can do, like you can actually again check the value of this, corrected, submit, and go to the next step. Otherwise, you can just complete it by setting the var state as completed once withdraw, and you can update the item as rejected. So over here, what we can do simply is like have one more condition. As I said initially itself, like it's getting complex because we want to do everything into one single flow. So if the selected output option is equal to this corrected submit option, so that means we will be transitioning to our next state by setting the variable, set variable to the next state, that is pending with manager. And in the other branch, we'll use the set variable the same state to completed, so that we can exit from our do until the first do until one, and can update the item with rejected status altogether. So I'll just say update item, and you can keep that item state as rejected because the person is withdrawing, like requester is okay with the rejected status either from manager or from finance team. So that's why the outcome was withdraw, and based on that outcome we are just updating our status as rejected. And you can log very well, like whatever you want to log, so it's fine. And over here, so once the request is corrected and submitted, so we'll again do one update. And the approval status would be pending with manager because we are transitioning to a different state. So we have done, we have captured, we have uh, entered everything for our state which is there for this flow started, and we can just name our flow as state machine expense approval and save this one. And we have this warnings for update item because we are triggering our flow based on item created and modified. So to set that up, we have to actually set one trigger condition, and that trigger condition would be if my state is new, then only it will trigger my flow. So for that, let's write one condition. So I've added this condition as approval status equal to new, then only my trigger should fire, my flow should trigger. So I'm just saving it, and then we'll just do one quick round of testing, and I'll just open up my Outlook as well so that we can see the notification for the various states and can see the actual flow in working. So I'll just open my Outlook, and in this I'll just create one new expense item. So let's say laptop purchase expense, and date you can enter, amount, category, hardware, and description you can do whatever you want to do. And this one would be by default, so though like we are setting that as manual one, but we need not to require if we set that default value to new. And I'll just save, and now we'll wait for our flow to trigger. As the status is new, so it should trigger. So our flow is running, and we'll just go to the Outlook to check like if we receive any notifications or not. So we got our first notification, and this is for new expense waiting for approval. This is for manager. As we see, we have two options. Either I can send this back to my requester, or I can send that to finance team. If I click on approve and enter my comment, so you can actually capture the comment as well, like while storing the log history. So once it's done, so I am expecting one more task for expense team, and then we'll send that back to our requester state. And in the status, we have this pending with expense team and approved by manager in description. So let's wait for that. So now we have task for our expense team where we have three options where I can approve and send back to manager or send back to requester. So this time I'll just send back to requester so that we can restart our flow. So I'll just say need more information from requester and submit it. And I'm just refreshing this item, so it's saying send back to requester. And because we did not add the description in that action, so that's why it's not updated, but it can be updated easily. And now we'll just wait for the other email, which would be for requester, as we would be transitioning to the state where requester has to do the corrective action and then just proceed in the flow once again. So we'll just wait for that email. So over here on once the expense team rejected that, so I got that email as a requester. So I can just click on corrected submit action, and then this action would be captured over here in this do until loop for my flow started, and again my next state would be pending with manager. So this will restart the flow back again. So because finance team has rejected, now expense requester resubmitted, now again this flow of sequential one would again get started. So which is what we were expecting. Rather than like having the multiple instances as a sequence flow, we can have the state machine flow, like where we can transition back from one state to another state. So just remember one thing. So because this flow would be just capturing all the values like which is local to this instance. So any update or status update which you wish to capture inside like your loops, then it will not be updated. So just try to work, play with the variables, not with the actual column values. Just remember that. So this is, I just again got my task for manager because my workflow was restarted. Now again, when I click on send to finance team, so it will just go to the finance team as a next state. So this concludes our state machine workflow. So over here are the couple of things which are important to just keep in mind. So we should have one do until loop which would be checking for your variable state. We should have the to have this individual states, state expense submitted, pending with manager and pending with finance team, and these state would actually communicate or get transition to the each other like based on this var state. So just have that in place. And I skipped like setting up the actual manager from O365 user connector, but in your actual flow you can do that. So that is it for today, and I believe like this was useful for me, so this could be useful for you as well. So that's it. Thank you.